My dad was so glad when I got sentenced to prison. He had been living with this fear that in my addiction I was going to die, and there were so many times where I totally should have died. He said one night the police knocked on the door and my brother answered. It was late at night, and they were asking where I was, and he was so scared that the police had showed up to tell them that I was dead. But no, I just had a warrant out on me, and so they went to my last known address. 2 months before I got sentenced to prison, I went and stayed with him. And he did everything he could to get me healthy again. He used to feed me so much. I would make these giant bowls of ice cream with like granola and chocolate, and like I would just be sitting there minding my business, and he would roll up with a grilled cheese sandwich or two. And I was so malnourished that I needed all the food, and he was so supportive. But I was still drinking and using drugs during this time. Another thing he did was he started taking me to church like it was mandatory. A total full-blown alcoholic. I had this little pocketbook I used to take with me, and I would put a half a pint of vodka in my little pocketbook, and like it didn't zip all the way because it barely fit, and like I would just kind of hide it, but I could literally just pick my purse up and take a shot of it wherever I was. And like that was the only way I was able to get through those services, because I felt such terrible conviction, and I was so scared. I was so scared of prison, what it was going to be like, and I was still kind of delusional, thinking maybe I'll get off on probation or something. And so the day came when I was supposed to go in front of the judge, and my dad took me up there, and I was intoxicated. I'm putting the cheese in the microwave. It makes it a lot easier to shred. So I was sentenced to prison, and my very first day, and I had like the lowest, deepest fear and sadness and acceptance that yes, this was happening. I was now in prison for the next 5 years, that I cried out to God. And I didn't really have a relationship with God, but I knew my dad had a killer relationship with God. And so I prayed out to the God of my dad's understanding. And I was like, if you're real, then you can have me. Like, if there's anything left in me that's even any good, like anything redeemable, you can have it. And I immediately felt something. But here's the kicker. My go-to back in the day was anytime I felt inspired, I would immediately call my dad and tell him and be like, guess what? I'm getting sober. And every single time I relapsed. And so I had the urge in that moment, right after I prayed that prayer, to get up and go call my dad, collect, and say I was going to get sober. And then right after that, I had this still small voice say to me, no, don't tell him, show him. And I was like, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And the first letter I ever got in prison was a letter from him. He sent me letters, and he put money on my books. And when I got to the prison where I was going to be doing my time at, he came and he visited me. Continued to visit me. This man visited me every single weekend for 2.5 years. We would just sit there, and he would bring enough money to buy snacks from the vending machine, and I would just pig out, and we would just talk about anything and everything. There were 4-hour visits, and we would fill every minute of those 4 hours. And anytime I said something like, when I get out, I'm going to do, and I would say something positive, because by this time he saw that there was a change in me, he would always encourage it, no matter what it was. Like, even if I said the craziest, wildest things, like, I want to go help old people, or I want to be a nurse, or like anything, if it was positive, he would encourage it. You know, at the beginning, I didn't get sober for myself. People always say, you got to keep yourself first. You got to get sober for yourself. In the beginning, I got sober for my dad. I loved him. He was such a good dad. He was a single dad for me and my brother. And I got sober for him. Eventually, it became about me. But if you're struggling and you are trying to get sober for yourself, a lot of people in late addiction, early recovery, we don't love ourselves enough to get sober for ourselves. So get sober for somebody else that you do love. And one day on visit, we were just talking about what it was like for him when I was out there in my addiction. And he said, there's one prayer I prayed at the end that God took full advantage of. he said, I prayed to God, and he said, I have no suggestions for Amanda. Like, whatever, like, God, I have no suggestions. Just save her, you know? And God was like, all right, bet, let's put her in prison. But it ended up being like the best possible thing that could have happened for me. I also called him every night that I was in prison, and one night he told me, because my brother was still living there, and my brother was acting up, and Steve had started to use drugs too. And there were nights when I would call my dad, and he would just be parked up at the kitchen window, because our kitchen window like faces our driveway, and he would just be waiting for Steve to come home, again going through the same thing as he went through with me, but with my brother now. And I went back to my cell, and I wrote a letter to God, and I was like, God, I was like, will you please just help him and let things just be restored before I get out of prison? Because I didn't want to come home to my brother using drugs and that tempting me, and I wanted my dad to have peace. So guess what? A couple of months later, my brother gets arrested and ends up being sentenced to prison. How about his max out date was June 30th? My max out date was July the 1st. So my dad started visiting us, both his kids, in prison. Like, Steve would get Sunday and I would get Saturday, and we would alternate like that. And now my dad had 2 kids in prison. And y'all, he was the best dad. He never did anything wrong. Like, he did not mess up to make us like that. It was not like that at all. Like, he was such a good dad. There's more, but I'm running out of time. So I'll just say that he's the best dad ever. Happy Father's Day. He picked me and Steve up. We're both sober now, and we're all meeting over at the house to have chicken tacos and spend some time with my dad. I love you, Daddy.